Hello,
We're live.
audience. Yep, we're live. It's me, Chris from History Dose, Joe, and today we have a special guest, Chris from Vlogging Through History. I'm going to bring on in a second. I spent some time making this. Oops. Let's see. Making this thumbnail, pirating an image from one of his thumbnails. And I don't know, it almost makes Chris from Vlogging Through History seem a little bit evil because he has the like red glow behind him. He's in all black. Somebody in the chat said we all look vaguely alike. Maybe we're distantly related.
Yeah, it might be.
But I don't think he's evil. He's probably one of the nicest guys on YouTube. And we're going to bring him on. We got some fun stuff. We're going to be talking today.
Well, part of this live stream.
No.
I was going to say, at the end of this
evil,
live
that's
stream,
right.
we'll give our moral estimation. Of,
It's Chris from
Chris.
Vlogging Through History, YouTube's very own bad boy.
Otherwise known as Sam Nixon, the Indian history expert.
He picks up copyright takedown notices left and right. Thank you for reacting to our content the other day too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I for some reason realized I hadn't done it yet, and I don't know why that is because I've been subscribed to you guys forever. But the problem is I don't watch history YouTube for entertainment because I don't want to watch videos I might do a reaction to, so I don't really get to watch much. So I hadn't actually watched any of them yet because I was saving them all. I was really impressed. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Like your research process, are you just kind of at any given time you're just reading whatever interests you, and that just adds to your enormous knowledge of sort of
I
European
fall down
history?
rabbit holes, and it'll be random things that get me interested. 10 years ago, my wife said, "Oh, we should check out this TV show. It's called The Tudors." And so we started watching Showtime's show, The Tudors, and that led me down a 10-year rabbit hole of reading about Henry VIII, the Tudors, the Wars of the Roses, and now it's one of my favorite topics, all because my wife said, "Hey, let's watch this TV show." So that's kind of how it happens. I never really know from one time to the next what it is I'm going to become interested in.
Honestly, if there is a good use for Wikipedia, it's just encouraging rabbit holes, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Because you
Like-
can click on something else and then it takes you to another page and another page.
Oh,
and
yeah.
honestly, I think Wikipedia, especially when it comes to history, gets a bad rap. That stuff's all pretty well sourced at this point.
Yeah, it is.
The more obscure you get, the worse the source is.
Right.
Like we did one on the Jamaican Maroons, and it was like these two pages link. They say contradictory things, and they're like linking to the other page. But certainly, like if you're covering like Napoleon or something like that, it's gonna all be there because, you know, our video on the Battle of Trafalgar. It's like the people. Our map in that video has this precise locations of every single ship because people have studied it to that extent that they, you know, there are freaks that want to do that, and you know, we benefit from being able to look at.
We benefit from it, but it's also because of the availability of information now. There's always somebody out there who knows just a little bit more about that topic than you do.
Yeah.
And they'll be the first one to point out the one random detail
I
that you
get so
messed
concerned.
up or that you forgot to mention that they think should have been in there.
I mean, I've
Happens all the time.
to death our Trafalgar one. I've started uploading the scripts with the footnotes and the bibliography. I mean, it's partially just to like allow people to go check out the sources, but it gives me peace of mind too, especially when we're doing those heavily covered ones where like when we did Roman history last, our Boudica one, it was just like, I know you guys, if I get the helmet wrong here, you're gonna destroy me. So
they call them thread counters, I think is the term that is used for people like that.
Yeah.
Well, we had I remember when we did our episode on the Comanche, I teased a painting ahead of time to the community, and I think it was someone called out that like the cactus that I had in that painting was not indigenous to that region at that time or something. So I had to go back and fix the species of the cacti that I had in that painting. So they're ravenous. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah, we get pretty obsessive about it, getting all those details right.
Mhm.
Chris, do you want to introduce yourself, just a little bit about your
Sure.
content?
Sure. So, for those who might not be familiar with me, my channel is called Vlogging Through History, and it actually grew out of the first channel I had, which was a gaming channel where I was playing history strategy games. And what I would do is, while I was playing a game, if I was playing a game about Gettysburg, I would talk about the history of Gettysburg while I played the game. And then, because of my travel for the job that I had, I would go to historic sites and just do little vlogs, and I would upload those to my gaming channel. Well, eventually I decided to make that a separate channel called Vlogging Through History. And I created the channel right in time for the COVID pandemic to hit, where I couldn't travel and do vlogs anymore. So for about 6 months, the channel sat there with nothing except old content that I had regurgitated from my other channel. And then somebody suggested, well, while you're waiting to be able to travel, why don't you do reaction videos? Say, take Sabaton, this Swedish metal band whose songs are all about history, and break down one of their songs and talk about the history behind it. So I did that, and the channel went nuts. And I was like, in the first couple of weeks, I was getting 1,000 new subscribers a day. And it was just something I never intended the channel to be, but suddenly became the avenue for growth. And I hit 100,000 in like 3 months, and been doing the reaction stuff ever since. But the channel was always created with the vlogs from historic sites in mind. So now the vlogs are made possible by the reaction content. The reaction videos are what allow for me to be able to do what I really love, which is the historic site stuff. So now I do both.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So the vlog was the initial purpose of the channel, and then the reaction is sort of, I don't know. I'm jealous. You get to put out content every day, and it takes me.
I do, and part of that is because I'm so impatient and I hate editing. So, and you guys understand this because I know you guys know how much work it takes to make one of your videos. The research, the editing, all of that stuff takes forever. I'm way too impatient to do all of that, and I'm way too particular about how I do things to hire somebody else to do it for me. So the reaction videos make it easy for me because I can do the daily content. I can cover a wide range of topics because I love to just learn about new things all the time. And I can do it without having to do a ton of editing because I just turn the screen capture on. I watch the video. I talk about it. I might look something up to add some more information to it. But for the most part, that's the work, is just what you see. So
amazing. All right, so I just we'll jump into it here for the people watching. Basically, the format is going to be you can submit questions, super chat questions, and we'll answer them throughout the show. But we'll also, I have 3 questions for Chris from Vlogging Through History. He has 3 questions for us. And we'll just have it be sort of a free-flowing conversation. Here's my little slideshow. Oh yeah, I gotta cross this out. There's not 2 early bird spots left anymore.
nice.
There are no early bird spots left. Those actually filled up, but we do have, I think it's like 12 spots. So if you want to go to Mongolia, it's a lot of fun stuff. I was able to add as an informal gathering the National Museum trip, so we can see some Mongol artifacts and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be on the first day, right?
Yeah, so we'll go to
dinner. We'll get a history lesson, and then we'll get to.
So that's the day that you guys everybody's arriving before the dinner that night.
Yeah, we'll be exhausted, and we'll look at old bows and stuff like that.
So I think the first time that I talked to one, I think it was you, Chris. I don't remember which one for sure. Maybe it was Joe. One of you reached out to me about my experience with Trova Trip before you planned all of this. And that was kind of, I think, the first time we ever talked was about that. And I just had my first trip back in October, and it was fantastic. And I'm excited for you guys. I think you're going to really enjoy it.
No, yeah, you gave me, in a way, it just seemed so perfect that it was like, I got to get somebody else's experience just to see how it worked. But I know it's been great for you. You have a couple more planned as well, right?
Yeah, I've got one coming up in Italy in April, and I've got 21 filled, 3 spots left on that one. So,
wow.
And I'm working on trying to do a couple more. I wanted to do Egypt. I was actually going to announce Egypt for December. And the week I was going to announce the Egypt trip was the week everything kind of broke out over in Israel and Gaza. And I thought, I'll wait a little bit before I do that one. So,
yeah.
But I'm told because Trova has a bunch of trips going over there, and they said everything's good. There haven't been any issues, so I don't know.
And certainly like Egypt, Mongolia, those sorts of trips, it almost seems like a pretty good idea to go on a group trip like this, because those are a bit harder to set up. Like I'm not going to be staying in yurts and doing camel rides alone. You know, I need someone to set that up for me. So it should be fun. I don't want to dwell on that too much, but I put the link for the Trova trip tickets at the top of the description of this video. There's also should be hyperlink to Chris's channel if you want to check out Vlogging Through History. Go subscribe. I want to start with some AI art of the week. We've long been critics of AI art, especially in the history sphere. But I need a Civil War expert like Chris from Vlogging Through History to tell me what's wrong in this image. This is a YouTube thumbnail. They keep showing up on my feed, and I keep disliking all the history videos with AI art, but YouTube doesn't learn. How's this looking here? Is this
my first issue with it? Is there's no way that a major general for the Union Army would be on the front lines grappling over a flag like that, because that's who that is. He's got a major general's shoulder.
And he's holding the Confederate flag, I think.
Yeah, he's grabbing the Confederate flag, which looks like, I can't tell if it's a square or a rectangle, because if it's a rectangle, it's the flag of the Army of Tennessee. If it's a square, it'd be the Army of Northern Virginia. And either way, I don't think I've ever seen a Confederate uniform that quite looks like that. I mean, it's not too far off. It's better than a lot of AI art. The Union uniform's pretty good, other than the fact that it's a major general, so he wouldn't be on the front lines like that. But otherwise,
my issue was more the three legs for whoever's attacking him. Somebody said Tom Cruise from The Last Samurai.
Yeah. There is an extra leg.
He does have 3 legs, and I was wondering how historical is that? Was either side?
I'm not aware of any 3-legged Confederates.
Right?
Who had the bayonet charge advantage? How many legs were at play there? Don't use AI art for history.
I will say this, though, that in this situation, if this major general for the Union successfully gets this flag and takes it back and survives, that's a Medal of Honor for him, because that was an automatic Medal of Honor if you captured a flag.
Oh, wow.
The problem for him is no one's going to believe him. He took it from a 3-legged Confederate. He looked like Tom Cruise. There's going to be an investigation about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into it. I think this next slide is just the first question I have for you, and I'll throw it up on the ticker banner so you guys keep track of. Oh, never mind. This is a question for all of us. This was from the Patreon. Wanted to give them some priority.
Yeah.
Adam Yang 2049. I always assumed, wasn't till recently I got that was probably a Blade Runner reference. I thought he was running for president and really delaying his campaign. But then I was trying to figure it's not a multiple of 4. It doesn't really work. But so he said, I know Vlogging Through History specializes in U.S. history, but my question goes out to y'all. What historical TV/movie inaccuracy bothers you the most? Anything off the top of your head?
There's a couple for me. One, I understand because of the nature of making movies, and that is in Civil War movies, cannon explosions hitting the ground. Artillery didn't do that in the Civil War. Yeah. It was timed. They were on timers. They weren't contact fuses, so they didn't explode when they hit the ground. They were timed to explode over the head of the infantry. I understand in making movies, you can't really make explosions over people's heads. It's a lot easier to put them in the ground and have them blowing up and shooting people into the air. But every Civil War movie does that, and it drives me nuts because the Civil War, that didn't happen. The other one for me, I'll pick one from a non-US movie. And there's a lot in Braveheart, but the kilts the Scottish are wearing in Braveheart, they didn't have kilts back then. That one always.
You gotta let people know it's Scottish somehow.
Yeah, that's true. How else would we know, right?
Yeah. I don't know, Joe. You might say the same thing as
I'm probably gonna say the same thing. Do you want me to go?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know if this is what you're thinking, Chris, my brother Chris, but mine usually has to do with the psychology of certain characters in the movie. So good example is, and I've talked to this about Chris before, is Ridley Scott can kind of fall into this, where um, in the Kingdom of Heaven, you have kind of some characters who are almost they more have like more of a kind of secular and progressive for the time mindset, which just always seems a bit anachronistic. I know in the last duel, I think was it Marguerite is the woman.
Yeah.
It was a great movie, but I felt like her character was a bit too anachronistically shocked at the fact that there would be such a thing like a arranged marriage or a duel to handle disputes. And so I see that sometimes in historical movies is there's usually a modern stand-in for the audience that's watching it, and that person will be able to give you the reaction of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing this. And it's like, well, historically, in the context, you would be, you probably wouldn't think twice about arranged marriages or something.
And I've had conversations with people along those same lines where I was actually just talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, a woman who was telling me like she couldn't believe in watching a movie that a woman, I forget what the exact movie was, that a woman would be okay with whatever the situation was. And I'm like, well, she wouldn't have had a choice. That was the way things were at that time. So, so the opposite is also true. People who don't understand history seem to be shocked that a woman would go along with something that today would never have flown.
I remember. Yeah, you were right, Joe. That was going to be my problem with it. I mean, there's a certain level where it's like you need sort of a stand-in for the audience to root for, but if you're portraying it as history, like you go back a century plus, 2 centuries, people are going to believe very different things from you. And so, yeah, I remember reading about Cotton Mather. So before the witch trials, this was probably a decade before, he had engineered the execution of another woman in Boston. I think it was the last witch trial in Boston. And so he had her executed because he suspected that she was a witch. There are other accounts from the time. Her name was Goody Glover. There are other accounts from the time that said her English was, she had really poor command of English. She was Irish and Catholic, and so there was some animosity between the Puritans. But also, it was interesting reading that last account where she sort of gets up and she says that it will not cure anything to execute her because she's not the one who bewitched her children. And that was really strange to me because it was like, she's not arguing that there's no witches. She's not arguing that her kids are completely fine. Somebody bewitched her kids.
It just wasn't me.
Yeah. And it was like, okay, so this is, it's a different dynamic. We want to read ourselves into that situation. But I think that's a lot of the fun of history is being able to say, what did people think? How did people view the world in this time? What
one of the reasons why
do they believe
it's one of the reasons why I always say this, but The Northman is, one of my favorite historical films, even though it's not really portraying something that historically happened. It's showing kind of the mindset of the people and how they may have thought about their own sagas. But it also will do stuff like, your protagonist watches villagers burn alive in a longhouse, and no one's really a good guy in that film. It's very morally ambiguous.
Yeah. All right. So those are most hated inaccuracies in movies. So my first question to you is let's veer away a little bit from history. If you had to stop covering history, what would your channel be about? I know you do gaming and stuff, but I'm not going to let you get away with finding a way around it and doing historical games. It's got to be unconnected.
Completely unrelated to history.
Yeah.
So I would probably use it, and I've done a little bit of this on I have like this side channel called VTH Extra where I do like my non-historical, non-gaming stuff. I probably would just start a vlog where I just shared stories from my life and what I learned from those situations and how I think they might help people. And part of that, I'm also a pastor, so I preach. And so my whole life has either been speaking in schools or speaking in front of a group at church or speaking to a camera for YouTube. So my whole life has been about being a public speaker and a communicator and trying to help people through my words. And so I think I would probably still do something along those lines. Not quite like a motivational speaker, but maybe just a storyteller that shared, here's a story from my life and here's what I learned from it. And maybe you can learn a little something from it too.
And you do a little bit of that right now, and that's sort of part of your content on just VTH Extra.
Yeah, I do. So for example, I shared a story on VTH Extra. I was raised by my grandparents, and I just shared because both of them passed away in the last year. And I just shared how being raised by my grandparents was the best thing that ever happened to me, because a lot of people were tempted to feel sorry for me because my mom left me when I was 8 and I never met my father. And so it was a way of saying, this is a thing that at the time as an 8-year-old was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But now at 46, I can look back and see how my life would never have been what it is had that not happened. And this is what I've learned in the meantime. Or when there was one of the school shootings that happened a while back. And honestly, I was pretty emotional at the moment. And I just got on and shared my thoughts about that and where I saw us as a culture and what we could learn from it and what we could hopefully do about it. And so those kinds of things.
I'd be down for that. Yeah, keep making that content.
I've tried to start doing more stuff on the Extra. It's got about 11,000 subscribers on it, and I hadn't made a video for about 6 months. I've even been doing some stuff like ranking my favorite 80s movies and 90s movies and those kinds of silly things too. People seem to like that. So,
yeah, I mean, you don't seem like the bad boy of YouTube that you've been billed as by all these people. You're putting so much positivity out there.
That's what I try to do. It seems like 99.9% of the people seem to like it, but you're never going to please everybody. And you guys know you have what do you guys have, like 900,000 subscribers now, something like that?
Like 650 or something.
Oh, 650?
Yeah.
Oh, you're still going to hit 1 million this year. So this is the year it's going to happen. But when you've got that many subscribers, there's always, even if it's a tiny percentage, there are going to be jerks out there. And you just you kind of learn to deal with that, and you kind of just have to let that roll off. And
no matter what you post, it's just
exactly.
You see some absurd things. These comment sections get a little bit wild at times. Although I get the sense that you've never had a negative comment. That's my outward perception.
You should see. Typically, and it's funny because it's typically when I delve into more modern things, like if I start talking about, say, Ronald Reagan, that's modern enough that people have very strong opinions on people like Ronald Reagan. And inevitably, within 10 minutes of each other, I'll get comments telling me that I am a woke liberal, and other people will say that I'm a Nazi conservative that hates everybody. And I'm like, did you both watch the same thing? But everybody has their own biases, and they come at it from that perspective, and they'll find a way to.
We've had a number of comments calling us woke for the Jamaican Maroon video, because it's maybe it has a bit of an anti-slavery message, but it's just too woke. It's too radical to be anti-slavery nowadays.
Anytime we touch on something that's controversial, we're either called far right or far left. But I think that's a good litmus test for indicating that you're doing something right, and you're just portraying the information as is, because then people can come along and impose whatever worldview they want to on it.
And I try to disarm as much of that as possible by anytime I know that I'm getting into a topic where my bias might be called into question, I try to acknowledge it up front and say, listen, I have biases. We all have biases. Just some people don't acknowledge theirs. And I try to be very upfront about my biases and say, listen, this is my worldview. This is where I'm coming at it from. It's okay if your worldview is different than mine. And I've tried to create a community where that's welcome. I don't care what people's political, religious, or other beliefs are. We're there because we love history, and that's what we have in common.
And I think that's a great thing, because I mean, if no one had biases, things would be kind of boring, I suppose. The only things I've met that don't have any biases tend to be inanimate objects,
Mm.
and you can't really get good discussions out of that. So
Yeah.
Rich Mitch says if you're getting bashed by both sides, then you must be doing something right.
Yep.
yep.
Correct. Rich Mitch
Accurate.
is also incredibly rich. Thank you for the super chat. Yeah. All right. So let's jump into your question.
Yeah. So I sent that over to you there. So if money and time were no concern, where would you travel and why?
Mm.
See, I think I would like to do a lot of South American travel, just
Mm.
be able to get a sense for that. I studied abroad in Argentina. My Spanish was very good when I did that because not many people spoke English there, and my host mom didn't. So if I wanted to eat, I had to improve my Spanish. But it just, I haven't had a chance to really properly cover South American topics on the channel. I feel like there's so much history there that, you know, visiting Incan sites, or I guess I would include Central America in that too. Just
been
a
there.
lot of those
I have
sites.
been there.
Yeah.
Trova has a Peru trip that looks fantastic, and I've been thinking about doing this summer.
Awesome. Yeah, so maybe that would be a trip for us down the line as well.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know, improve my Spanish and just going to be able to see that side of history that I feel like, I don't know, it's one of those domains in history that can easily sort of get bypassed, or it's a footnote or something.
Have you guys done anything on the Incans on your channel?
No, we haven't.
No.
It's near the top of our perspective topic list.
Yeah.
So we have some fun ones on deck, but we'll do that this year probably.
What about you, Joe?
Oh, geesh.
Say
So
Mongolia.
many countries. You know, one thing that I would want to return to, Chris and I went to Italy 4 or 5 years ago or something. I think right before we started the channel, or maybe we had already started at that point. I can't remember.
No, it was the same year, but it was probably about 5 months before we started.
Yeah, and amazing trip. We went to Rome, but we were kind of doing a tour to Europe, and there's only so much you can fit in 3 days when you're in Italy. So I would love to go back. I mean, I would love to go explore the catacombs, you know, go see a lot of the ruins and stuff. To me, I've always had an affinity for Rome, so I would love to go back.
Any helpful tips for me since I'm making my first trip to Italy in April?
Oh, the first place we went to
Awesome.
in Rome was called the Basilica di San Clemente.
Yeah. Yep.
You could just walk by it on the street and you wouldn't know that's anything special. It's like, I think, a 14th century basilica.
It's really close to the Colosseum as well.
Okay. Yeah, it is. Built on top of a 4th century Christian church, built on top of a gathering site to the god Mithras. So you can go down each level and you're traveling back in time all the way.
Oh, nice.
When you get back to, you know, ancient Rome and the cult of Mithras. So that was a great starting point for us in Rome, because it was like, okay,
it's a place that a lot of, I don't know, I guess it probably wouldn't be on many tours.
Yeah.
And, you know,
See, those are the sites that I love. The ones that aren't a bazillion people everywhere. And
yeah, and then so once you get to those lower levels, there's the like gathering site to the cult of Mithras. It's like 4th century AD or something like that. And then you're seeing like very early Christian depictions of, I think, Mary and Jesus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think it's some of the earliest depictions of Madonna and Child there. When you get into the 4th century church,
you're just walking through history, and it's really cool. And I think it's completely free. I want to say.
Because I'm going to have 2 full days before our tour starts, so I'm going to be checking some stuff out on my own.
Yeah,
because I think it's still like a operating church, and so I think you can go down for free, or it's super affordable or something. But you are just walking through different centuries.
Wow,
it's kind of fun that they kept the stuff below. I think they've done more and more excavation and stuff. but you can see like through these bars, like this like altar that was like some older pagan cult, and then built on top of that like early medieval church, mid-medieval church, late
It's
medieval
interesting
church.
how they've done that, how often those sites get repurposed for other religions rather than just building a different site. Even things like the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, just being turned from a church into a mosque.
I think the Holy Sepulchre too is built on top of a Roman temple as well.
Oh yeah, yes, I think you're right. I think I have read that.
Yeah.
So that was when we asked a question like you asked. One of our cousins said, "Visit this place," because no one's going to recommend it to you otherwise. But it's just a really cool sort of hidden gem. So Basilica de San Clemente.
Nice.
All right. So question 3. In a way, this is going to feel like a pessimistic question, but it's not. It's more like we tend to. I feel like every era has its own bias of like, this is the worst things have ever been. We got about 5 years left, and they're all wrong, you know. So, my question to you is, let me hide this. What was the time in U.S. history where the country's future looked the bleakest, excluding the Civil War? No Civil War, and maybe subtract the last 20 years too, just because.
So I'll go to a time before. I'll do 2 answers. First of all, I would say before we even had a country, really, is honestly the bleakest it looked was 1776. Revolutionary War begins in April of 75. The week that independence is declared in Philadelphia, this massive British fleet sails into New York and proceeds to just whip George Washington to the point where he has no army left. And that moment right before the Battle of Trenton in December of 1776 is when Thomas Paine wrote Our American Crisis, and he starts it with, "These are the times that try men's souls." That to me is probably the darkest moment, at least in the early history of the country, because that is the closest we came to not even having a country. And George Washington, for all his weaknesses as a general, he pulled that out of nothing and rescued what was left of the tattered remnants of his army and turned it into something and gave people hope. So that was a huge moment, I think. But I think after the Civil War, Reconstruction, I think Reconstruction was an incredible time of opportunity for our country that we massively screwed up and set the stage for everything that has happened since. I think it was really bleak. I mean, you could make the argument, and I don't want this to be misinterpreted. You could make the argument that for the freed slaves, it almost would have been better for them to go back to pre-Civil War slavery than what they faced afterwards with freedom. The way they were treated, the way that the lynchings began and the persecution began, because now when they were property, they had value to the white men of the South. When they were no longer their property, what little value they had to those men was gone, and they treated them that way. And unfortunately, in the North, public opinion turns against Reconstruction in the 1870s to the point where people are basically like, we're just tired of this. We don't even want to hear about it anymore. And I feel like that was a really bleak time for our country, because we had such an opportunity there to set that right as much as we could and avoid so much of what we've dealt with since then. So for me, I mean, Reconstruction is always the thing I point to outside the Civil War, where I just feel like it was probably the darkest chapter of our country's history.
How should it have been done differently?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, and listen, I love Abraham Lincoln, and my favorite speech in American history is his second inaugural address, which is the one where he talks about with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. He talks about binding up the nation's wounds. He talks about caring for the widow and the orphan. He talks about peace and reconciliation. But honestly, in hindsight, I think maybe he was wrong about that. And I think the way that we needed to deal with it was to be harsh and was to crack down and take away all that property that from those plantation owners and turn it over to the freed slaves. I'm not using that as an argument to say that we should be doing reparations and things like that in the modern era. That's a totally separate issue, and I know people like to connect the two. But I think in hindsight, maybe we should have probably been a little harsher on the South than we were, and maybe we wouldn't be dealing with the issues we are now. But I confess, it's a lot easier to look at it and see the problem than it is to say, here's how we could have fixed it.
Just want to say, if anyone wanted to portray you as a villain, they could clip up to the last 5 minutes in whatever way they want and really depict you.
I've had people do that. They'll send me little clips of things I've said out of context to make it sound like I said something absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
This is the last day your YouTube channel is in existence, actually.
Canceled.
My thoughts were actually even more recent.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that you would say, and this is going to be my answer, is just the 60s in general. Like, you have the threat of nuclear war hanging over you.
Yeah.
Very tangible threat. The Cuban Missile Crisis is how you open the decade, and then your president gets killed, and then his brother and MLK get killed, and it's like
Vietnam. You
have Jim Crow alive and well. Sort of the civil rights struggle in general going on there. It's like when you see sort of like the pessimism about the modern age, there's tons of people that were alive or grew up in the 60s, and to be able to think like it was pretty bad then. If I'm living at that time, you're like, all right, we're either going to blow up or we're going to have more, another secession, or the president's going to get killed, or these, the moral paragons of our time are getting killed.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great point. And I think, if I were somebody, and that's just before the time when I was born, living through that, I could certainly see that. Along those lines, I had a conversation with somebody a while back where they were legit trying to express the view that this generation, like that's in their teens and 20s now, that it's never been worse for any generation ever than what they're facing right now. And I asked them why, and they started talking to me about the cost of college and housing. And I said, all right, time out. A person born in 1900, as a teenager, there's a world war that kills tens of millions of people, that goes right into a global pandemic that kills maybe 5% of the entire world's population. After that, they go into a Great Depression, followed by a second world war that kills even more people, followed by potential of nuclear holocaust, followed by the 60s. And that's all in one person's lifetime. I will never complain about how hard my life is after thinking about it that way.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's just, I took a class in college that was called Histories of the Apocalypse. And a lot of it was just based on sort of how, these different visions of the apocalypse, but of people who thought that the apocalypse was incoming, or some of it was just apocalyptic literature, but it was like speaking to sort of Malthusian fears, the 1700s, 1800s. And it is interesting, so many times people felt like, all right, this is it. We're at the part where morality disappeared and everybody died.
Everybody has always thought that. I mean, if you were living in Europe during the Black Death, you absolutely would have thought that. I mean, in a couple of years, half the people are dead, and it's like that everywhere. I mean,
we cover Mongol invasions all the time. It's like, all right, it's over.
Yeah.
They win.
You could certainly, I mean, if you're looking at like the biblical book of Revelation, you could look at Genghis Khan and say, man, he's one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, literally. I mean, bringing death to people.
A number of Christian rulers saw Genghis Khan as sort of either a sign of the end times, or just the Mongols in general as sort of like a force that was going to help Christianity, even though he wasn't Christian, because they had perceived that the wars with the Islamic world were going on. So it's like, yeah, finally a savior, and then the Mongols come to Europe and start destroying you too. So it's like, it's fun times. Everybody thinks the world's about to end. It's not about to end. They always get the predictions wrong, and then you want your money back from the televangelist. You go, I thought it was 2012. Okay.
Oh yeah, Y2K. Before that, I mean, the world wasn't going to end, but everybody was talking about how everything electronic was going to stop working, and make sure your computer's off when the time changes.
Okay, so question 4. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So my next question for you guys is what are your strengths and weaknesses as a content creator? Kind of like an interview question if you were applying for a job as a YouTuber.
I can go first, Joe, and then meanwhile you dwell on your strengths and your failings.
Yeah, it takes me a while to think of my weaknesses, so thank you.
I would say my strengths are, I've always felt like I was pretty good at being able to sort of capture attention and have a sense for how a story should be told. So, when I was in college and I was thinking about being a history professor, I always felt like the most fun part of it for me was sitting down, getting all the research and being like, what is my professor? I wonder if my professor is going to like this. And it wasn't even about the grade. I just thought it would be cool if he was into the story too. And so, I always felt like having a good balance of those things. I always hate when a history video starts with a summary of what happened, and then we'll go into it's like, no, don't ruin the drama. We have good stuff here. So I feel like my strength is always being able to tell a story and convey information in a way that doesn't feel like the audience is a student trying to memorize certain facts. Some of my ideas, if you go through our catalog, it starts out more like video essays, little quick topics, things that you could tell somebody else at a party that you learned. This is what eyeglasses were for. This is the reality of pirates or something. But I did sort of, as we started doing more story-based content and Joe got better at digital art, I did sort of make some connection, which was when you're watching a movie, you're watching Harry Potter or something, you're not straining to remember the name of this house and this character or whatever. And by the end of the movie, you don't even know that you put in 0 effort and 15 people's names, and the name of the school and the separate houses and the name of the tournament and stuff like that. And it's like, you could apply that same principle to history. And by the end of it, it's just, you're not trying to remember the death date of Horatio Nelson. You just remember he was this guy who did this. And along the way, you now learned that Napoleon was doing this was happening. And if you just, I don't know, I've always been able to read something and start to visualize it in my head. And I feel like anybody can get into history. It's all about how it's taught. So a lot of the channel is me trying to, like, the sensation that I get when I read it, I want to do the best I can to sort of give you that. Weaknesses, I would say, I'm usually not super into the logistics of battle or strategy or anything like that. I mean, for me, and again, I'm so happy that there are people that do that. I'm happy that we have the thread counters for us to visualize it, for Joe to use for his art. But for me, a lot of it is about what did this look like? What was it like to experience that? What does it sound like? What is the emotional situation of the Battle of Trafalgar? Because if I just give you the numbers of dead and the numbers of ships involved, numbers captured, you do completely miss something.
Yeah.
I can tell you about the Battle of Stalingrad, and you go, wow, that's a pretty high number. That's a lot of casualties. But it's a completely different experience to read, say, a journal from that.
Mm.
Go, oh my God, this is horrific.
And I'll say you do a great job with that, because when I did the video, your Trafalgar video the other day, that's exactly what I found myself thinking about was, what was it like to be on the deck of one of these ships charging into the French lines in the middle of that? That's exactly the picture that I was imagining in my mind and I hadn't thought of it that way before. I was thinking more about the actual tactics and the strategy and how they lined up. But then once they were going in, so I think you did a really good job with that.
Thank you. Yeah. And so all that is to say, basically, if you're coming for a lot of strategy or tactics, you might feel a little bit disappointed by our videos. If you want the specific month that this happened, it's not always there, because a lot of it is I'm just concerned with getting something across to you and getting you, it's not going to be an exhaustive account of a battle, but it's here's the general idea. Here, I want to stoke your interest in it so that you can go learn more about it. So yeah, those would be my answers to that. What are you thinking of, Joe?
Well, as far as strengths go, I think a big strength of mine is being able to become incredibly obsessive with whatever I'm working on. I'm sure that's the same with Chris. But with regards to painting and artwork and sound design and music composition, I love working overtime on that stuff too. Love, drinking coffee. I was just composing the music for the next video. And there's I get this creative kick, and it will keep me up at night, where I'll be going through YouTube, videos, looking up what did this Celtic instrument sound like. That's a tease, by the way, for a future episode. And then thinking, how can I make a song that sounds modern but still sounds true to the era? I think another strength of mine is, especially when it comes to painting, and people who watch our speed paint videos on our channel in the playlist section will know that sometimes I don't really sketch out a lot beforehand. It's very much, digital paint thrown around, and then it's kind of like finding images in clouds, and then I will carve that up and make something out of it. Sometimes I'll put markers for composition. Where should the ship be to make that looks the most desirable to the eye? I think those are two of my strengths. I think as far as weaknesses go, two I can think of off the top of my head would be me getting over eager about something in an artwork and making an assumption, and then painting a wall where it shouldn't be, or giving someone a weapon they shouldn't have, and then Chris comes along and says, "Oh, everything you've been working on for the past 3 hours, just like that, doesn't work. That's not historically accurate." So then I have to go back. Another thing is, and Chris and I argue a lot about this type of stuff, is when I get married to an idea. And I can think of our episode on the Gupta Empire. I had a very concrete idea of how I wanted it to sound, how I wanted it to feel in the beginning, and I wanted it to feel almost kind of, sinister and dark. I don't know why, but then Chris reviewed the opening scene, and he's like, "No, this isn't working." And I was like, "Yes, it is working. You don't know what I'm trying to do. Do you hear this instrument in the background? That's from the time period." But then he suggested we want something almost like like a faded glory, like we're looking at the ruins of an empire. And then I added in some brass and some other sound effects, and it worked really good. Almost had more of a Howard Shore feel to it. So I think, yeah, those are probably my weaknesses.
Great. We have a super chat. Does Chris from Vlogging Through History, he stipulated later, have any insight on Hui Song?
I actually don't even know what that is.
I think Hui
The
Song
Chinese history?
Emperor. Yeah. I'm going to guess no on that, but
No. Yeah, maybe you guys do.
it's a video for another day. We have another chat here. Joe, your art on the
Steve from
Trafalgar-
Manchester.
Oh, you know him?
Yeah, I know Steve.
So a newcomer maybe to the channel. Your art on the Trafalgar video was excellent. Did you look at other period artwork as a reference for your work?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of my style in general is very much influenced by maritime art. And you'll notice if you go to my art station all the way 6-7 years ago, I was painting oceans and boats because I really loved the works of like Turner. A lot of romantic era stuff too, like Bierstadt was huge influence on me early on. So yeah, when it came to the Trafalgar video, Chris found a lot of good art references to like paintings at the time, or generally within a century of the event, that were just really beautiful to look at. So yeah, that was a huge inspiration.
Yeah, and yeah, I compiled all the flags and stuff and tiny details.
And Geoff Hunt is a really great maritime artist that I use for inspiration on this as well. Anyone wants to look him up.
Yeah, and it was kind of funny too because I guess or I at least, always connected maritime art with sort of like calming background stuff, even like the cannon plumes and stuff. And that was, I don't know, completely upset by the Battle of Trafalgar. So we have some beautiful ship paintings, but it's like, when you actually think about it, how do you kill 7,000 people by ship? That's by splinter and iron and infection and stuff like that. So it gets, I actually said to people, I think it's our most violent video, not in terms of scale. But
well, and you figure too, the difference between shooting people on land and shooting them on a ship is that all that blood's going somewhere on that ship. It's not soaking into the ground.
Goes on
so just the blood and the gore that would have been present too. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Some of the accounts that didn't make the video, but so the British, I mentioned it in the video a bit, but the French and Spanish will keep their dead on board. The French are not technically Catholic at that point because it's post-revolution, but they still have that tradition. And then the Spanish are Catholic. So they want to give a proper burial to those men. So they end up keeping a bunch of rotting bodies on board. The British were just very practical about it. So if you're not Horatio Nelson, you're going overboard. In the film Master and Commander, you can see they sew up the body bags, and then they do the last one through the nostril, just to make sure that they weren't still awake. And a lot of times they were still alive. So there was some account of somebody who they were manning a cannon, and the cannon blew up because it got hit by the other cannon first. And so like one of their buddies is laying on the ground, he's seemingly dead. They go to throw him out of the gun port, and at the last moment, like he wakes up and like pulls himself back in.
Jeez.
Which is like, so they weren't in the middle of the battle. They were not taking any time to bag people up. You threw your friend's body overboard and stuff. So it's like, that was a horrific time. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so where are we now? Oh, I have, it's my question for Chris. All right. I guess we can try to keep this mostly spoiler free. I feel like people don't care at this point, but how would you fix Napoleon, the movie?
I would use as my model the Lincoln movie. So Lincoln, when they started out to make that movie, Steven Spielberg did, they were going to use Doris Kearns Goodwin's whole book, Team of Rivals, which if you've ever read it, I don't know if you have, it's like 1,000 pages, and it's an incredible book. It's one of the best history books I've ever read in my life, but you can't make a movie out of that. It's too much. So is Napoleon. Napoleon's life is too much for even a 3-hour movie. What they should have done was taken like the movie Waterloo did. Waterloo focused on one specific part of Napoleon's life. They should have done that. They should have, instead of trying to do everything and doing it all badly, they should have taken one small part, maybe focus on Austerlitz, maybe focus on Russia, whatever it might be. Don't try to do too much. Just do what Lincoln did. Lincoln did 3 months of the end of Lincoln's first term. And that was all they focused on. And it did it great. That's how I would fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe and I are probably in the minority among history creators, but we both liked it as a movie. We liked the movie, but in a historical sense, it's just like
Right.
you end up skipping so much stuff. And
Well,
it's for the same reason you were saying, because it's such a huge story that it's like there are a number of events in there. They made it so, or Ridley Scott made it so, like, whether you're a big Napoleon fan or you don't know anything about Napoleon, you're going to be disappointed, because if you're a big
Mhm.
Napoleon fan, you skipped over this. And then a number of those sort of time jumps between, say, like the coronation and Austerlitz, whatever. If you're not a Napoleon fan, those things don't mean anything to you.
Yeah.
It's not like,
Yeah.
yes, Austerlitz, yes, the coronation. I remember that painting. It's like they don't care. So that's not, if you know a lot about the Russia campaign, you're like, I want this to feel long and drawn out and, completely exhaust me by the end of the Russia campaign. And you don't. But if you know nothing about the Russian campaign, you're like, well, that was weird. That was 10
Mhm.
minutes, 10 minutes
Yeah.
of a little bit of snow and somebody burned something. So I do think the longer version, the 4-hour version that's coming out on Apple will be better.
I
but-
agree, but I don't know if you've heard what a lot of the extra content is just going to
Josephine.
focus on Josephine's life before she met Napoleon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that doesn't solve anything.
So it doesn't solve the problem if that's the case.
And
If
that
we're
leads
just getting
me-
a bunch more of Josephine and not a lot more context for Napoleon. I think the biggest issue for me is that if you didn't go in knowing a lot about Napoleon, you wouldn't walk away from the movie thinking this is one of the most consequential and most brilliant generals and military leaders in history. You wouldn't think that at all. You wouldn't even think he was good. You don't learn that from that. You don't learn that this is a guy who probably set about some of the most important reforms in European civil history, because you don't get any of that. Even when you do get glimpses like the coup, which is such a massive moment, we get like 5 minutes of it, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then we're moving on to the next thing, and we're focusing on him being upset with her for cheating on him. And I don't know.
I have a theory about the film. I think Ridley Scott wasn't attempting to give us a sprawling Napoleon biopic, because I just can't fathom that, like, this is how he would do it. I think the film, I think the title Napoleon is a misnomer. I think it should have been called Napoleon and Josephine, or the Josephine Letters, because basically the film does an okay job of showing you the character of Napoleon as portrayed through the Josephine Letters, who is awkward, bipolar, even vindictive, has a lot of, raunchy choice words. And I think it does a good job of doing that. But calling the movie Napoleon, I mean, everyone's going in thinking they're going to watch a film about Napoleon, not Napoleon as seen through a small sliver of, historical.
That's a great point. It's about expectations.
So I think that I have a theory that I bet Ridley Scott originally was going to call it Napoleon Josephine or something along those lines, and then the studio's like, who the heck is Josephine? Just call it Napoleon.
Yeah.
And that's one theory, because I know, like, with even with Robert Eggers' The Northman, he wanted it to be called the Saga of Amleth, which would have been historically accurate. But the studio said, what's an Amleth? What's a saga? So they changed it to the Northman. So
that's a great point. And I think that's one thing that I did like about the movie is how much they did focus on his letters with like the voiceovers and stuff,
Yeah.
because not a lot of people realize what a prolific writer Napoleon was. Not just the tens of thousands of letters that he wrote, like to his brother and to Josephine and to others, but the stories that he wrote. And you know, he invented stories and wrote these like romantic stories and these
Yeah.
epic adventure stories. And so they did. I thought that was good that they covered some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think I guess my biggest gripe with it, and again, this is saying that Joe and I like it as a movie
Mhm.
because we went in with such low expectations of everyone's,
Yeah.
this is trash. It trashes Napoleon's legacy, whatever. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to divorce this from history. It does a lot of things well. It looks cool to have
yeah.
that many extras on screen, you know, low CGI. I love that sort of old school filmmaking.
Like the soundtrack.
Mhm.
A lot of the cinematography is beautiful. Coronation scene is beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
French Revolution. Yeah, soundtrack is great. It's just like it has a lot of elements there that once I divorce it from trying to say, does this show me who Napoleon actually is? I can say, this is a pretty good movie. It's a well-made movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's kind of what I said, because I did a review of it like immediately after I got home from the theater that day that it came out. And that was kind of what I said, is I said, I thought it was a good movie as a historic film to teach somebody about Napoleon. It's not, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But as entertainment, all right, fine. I got no problem with that.
Yeah, and I think the biggest aspect that bugged me as I was trying to connect it to the historical figure, and I think it would have actually just made the movie better overall, is that we basically got none of the charm of Napoleon.
Yeah.
I do remember Ridley Scott, I think it was in an interview with the channel History Hit or something. But before whoever was interviewing him was saying, like, it's just like, Napoleon seems a bit awkward in this. Why did you decide to write him that way? And Ridley Scott was like, it was actually Joaquin added that. And it was like, so it might not have actually been part of the actual idea of the movie to make him awkward. But even if that's the case, I feel like there wasn't really any space for us to understand why do people love Napoleon.
That's
like,
one of the things I mentioned too, is that people don't realize how much he was loved by the men of his army. They called him the little corporal, not as an insult, because they felt connected to him. He was one of them, and he did. He was very charming. He was very inspirational. Yeah, he probably had some awkwardness to him, but you don't see that. Even from the trailers, just the whole like very quiet kind of mumbling that he did. Just Napoleon was a charismatic guy.
Yeah.
And you don't get that from the film at all.
And you can make an anti-Napoleon film, which I would say that this generally is. You can make an anti-Napoleon film and still show the charisma. I mean, like, you could basically do that with any dictator.
Yeah.
Any dictator that you
Nobody
like,
would deny that Adolf Hitler was charismatic.
Yeah, you are losing part of the part of that character, part of our ability to understand that. And also it makes sense of some of those scenes, like when he comes back and the soldiers embrace him instead of shooting him. Like, I haven't seen any soldier express gratitude toward Napoleon this entire time.
Yeah,
once we get to that
felt
point.
unearned. They also, I think they really skipped over, excuse me, the restoration of the throne in Louis XVIII. Like, I feel like we got like 1 minute of a scene kind of
didn't know what was happening. Like, if I hadn't known that, I wouldn't know.
Yeah, and I have I had a friend who went to go see it, and for him, I know he felt like the pacing was all over the place. He couldn't keep track of things, and I'm like, yeah, because like if you don't know the history, like you just can't keep track of the movie. It's historical vignette, historical vignette, historical vignette, and you're like, okay, whoa, what's going on here now? The throne's restored? How? Like, and you can easily, like, if you doze off for a minute, you can easily, like, not see that part at all.
Right, yeah, because we go right from, say, the coronation to Austerlitz to Russia, and that's like 8 years, right there, and it happens like back to back. And yeah, I agree. That was one of my biggest frustrations with it. It was snapshots. It was little snapshots of his life that were all kind of pieced together.
Should have been like a 10-episode, HBO series, which I think Spielberg is working on.
Yes,
a
he
Napoleon
is.
series.
We got a comment. You can make a whole Marvel universe on Napoleon. Yes, you can.
No.
I mean,
Yeah, you don't even
say
get
that
into
because they will make
marshals. I mean, there's so much there.
25 movies with a ton of
Yeah.
CGI, so don't give them that idea. But I do think a mini series is the way to do it. Like there are certain things like the invasion of Egypt. You want to feel the troops crossing the desert and have it be exhausting.
Egypt was like 3 minutes of the movie, and most of it was spent on him finding out Josephine was having an affair.
Yeah, and you could see how good that TV show could be.
Yeah,
if you're just like, here are the 1 or 2 episodes on Egypt. They're amazing, and then so is the episode on Russia. That one was amazing. It's like one of the darker ones, and that would also give you the breathing room to. We have people saying they should have shown more of the marshals and stuff to introduce certain characters. You could do.
Wow.
Yeah, a little Thomas Alexander Dumas during the Egyptian campaign, and then it's almost like Band of Brothers or something, where some of the episodes, focus a little bit more on a side character,
right?
And then then you actually are learning history, and you're just sort of connecting to these characters, and you have a better idea of actually what happened.
You could have an episode on the Siege of Jaffa too, and then you can go into the ethical costs of Napoleon's campaign as well.
A couple comments in here. It's some good engagement when you bring up Napoleon, the movie.
Yeah.
And I guess just Napoleon the man. All right, so let's jump into your last question.
Yeah, so what era of history do you wish more people knew about?
So I would say, and we're kind of trying to do our best on this channel to remedy some of this, but I don't know if it's necessarily an era per se.
Or even an event or a person or whatever it might be.
It would just be Native American history in general, because, I think there are sort of 2 ways that Native American history is taught in school, generally speaking. You either get something that's kind of apologia for, the U.S. reservation system and the American Indian Wars. And so you have something that's probably like overly glorifying the United States. I think sometimes that can happen with Union generals too. It's like, these were the heroes of the Civil War, and now they are kind of doing some disreputable things to certain Native Americans. But I think the other way, and this is the way that I would say that I normally got it in school, which was something that was opposite that. So it was, it was broadly, and I would say rightly critical of a lot of the U.S. policies, but it still felt like I didn't learn anything about Native Americans. So not only did I not get any sense of agency for the Native Americans, but they're just sort of treated as this one block of people, which is like this, it's just sort of covered here and there as like the Native Americans did this, and then the line moved from here to here to here to here, and then let's move on to.
So it was all in the context of how they fit into the story of what was happening in American history rather than having their own history.
And they're treated as a monolith, which is, to me, what we kind of like to do in the channel. I do have a video that I'm working on, probably be out in February, but picking different indigenous nations or tribes, and being able to explore that and just be able to say, like, okay, it is really fascinating to say, okay, what did they believe about the world? What were their practices? And then even understanding the politics with the U.S. and those separate tribes, you can kind of see it's not all the same strategy. They're trying different things, and tragically, basically none of it works. But to me, it's really fascinating to learn about that and say, okay, well, not everybody in the U.S. Or North America spoke the same language. They didn't have all the same beliefs, and so I just feel like it's really cool to get a picture of that world, which to me is just basically goes uncovered by, I think, a lot of mainstream history channels, but you just never learn about it. And to me, that's really cool to just say, these are, completely different cultures that you've never heard about, or maybe it was, one of a long list of tribe names that you heard about when they say these people lived in your state or something. But it's also, all of these sites are right in the US. So, these are places that you can visit. So as we're thinking about incorporating some live footage into some of our videos, and almost having like a separate series, I think, so you visit sites, but it would probably be a little bit like that, but it's telling a story at the same time, and it would incorporate certain things. And I think we could even incorporate Joe's art. So, you visit a battlefield or something, and then now we're in a painting that looks exactly like the thing I was filming, except there's people fighting on it. So that to me, I think, is just like it just feels like a complete like curiosity well that you can go, I've never heard of this person. I've never heard that these people existed. Let me go read. You can go read 3 books on them, and then you're kind of presenting something new to the world, which, it always surprises me to even have like members of these different indigenous communities reach out or comment, because a lot of them are like, there's 3,000 members of this tribe, and you'll get a couple comments, and it is really cool to see. I really like learning about the Haida. So we did an episode on Haida Gwaii, which is like it's Canadian, but it's like a really tiny island off of the Western Canadian coast, and it's native. It's indigenous Americans wearing wooden armor, and it was like the coolest thing ever. Like, how have I never heard of this stuff? And they had contact with people who fought in the American Revolution and stuff, and different fur traders. And it's like this entire saga that, I wouldn't have heard about otherwise. And it certainly wouldn't be covered in a school. And so, it's just, if you want like Wikipedia rabbit holes, you can keep clicking those, and you're suddenly in like a completely new world, which is just awesome. It's like, it's like a new history.
Like, for example, for us, here, I live in Northeast Ohio. The extent of what we learn in school about history concerns indigenous peoples typically is about the tribes that were local to Ohio. So we're learning about the Adena and the mound builders that lived in southern Ohio, or the Shawnee, or we talk about the Moravian Indians that became Christians that were massacred at Gnadenhutten, because that's local to us here. And that's kind of the extent of it. And then you move on to the next thing.
Yeah, you have that in Ohio, isn't there the Mound of the Serpent? Or
Serpent Mound's down in southern Ohio. Yeah, it's down along the border with Kentucky.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and I just feel like that's I don't know. I love to put that out there and get people's reactions on something. And we did a survey a couple weeks ago, and just asked people what draws them to the channel, and the topic selection was a big thing.
Yeah.
Not all those get big. We haven't had video hit big in a few months anyway, but I feel like it gets you a core of people that are just, there are certain channels. I think like Let Me Know is a channel that no matter what that guy puts out, it's like you can sort of build a trust with that channel, where he puts out a video about JFK or DB Cooper. Nobody's talking about it. It's not an anniversary of anything. And it's like, he put out a video on it. I need to go learn about that. I didn't care about Jack the Ripper. Now I care about Jack the Ripper. So that's kind of what I want
And
to do.
as somebody who does care about Jack the Ripper, because my in high school, my big term paper that I did at the end of my senior year was about Jack the Ripper.
Did you find him?
His is the best documentary I've ever seen on Jack the Ripper.
Awesome.
Absolutely. And I've seen hundreds of them.
We've got a super chat here. If you want an interesting topic, I'm a little biased. The Batavia, a ship from the Dutch East India Company that was stranded on the coast of Africa. Yeah, I want to do some more like East India Company stuff. That people don't know how big of a player the Dutch were in the world at the time.
Yeah, those companies were like nations as far as their influence
with their own
what's happening in the world.
militaries and conquering. And oh, I'm sorry, Joe. You gotta answer question 6 as well.
For me, well, Chris kind of took my answer, but my second one, and I'd be interested in hearing your take on it, because you come from, you're a preacher, isn't that what you said?
Yeah.
I've always kind of liked the work of the historian Tom Holland, with regards to the idea that a lot of the modern mindset with regards to ethics is inherited from a Christian Rome, and even people who are secular, irreligious, still very much the hangover of that ethical system that kind of revolutionized the ancient world is very much here today. Stuff like charity, turn the other cheek, nonviolence, forgiveness, mercy, a lot of that stuff you could find in the ancient world, but mostly was done between kin or tribe members. There was no such thing as loving your enemy or willing the good of your enemy. That was just didn't make sense. So I'm actually interested in if you've come across something similar, or you think something similar to that.
I haven't thought about it a ton like that, but I've long said that, I mean, you can't possibly, no matter what your worldview is, you can't possibly understand history without understanding the religions involved. I mean, you can't understand anything of the last 2,000 years of European history without understanding Christianity, without understanding, understanding Africa and the Middle East is impossible without understanding Islam, or Judaism, or some of those other religions. Understanding the East is only going to make sense when you understand the Eastern religions. They're so intertwined for so much of history that they did shape those things. And I think up until probably the last couple of generations, just speaking from a Western history perspective, even people who weren't necessarily actively living a Christian life probably lived by Christian principles. And certainly the society was Christian principle. I think 100 years ago, most people just accepted, for example, that the Bible was true. Even if they didn't necessarily live a Christian life, they probably accepted basically that most of what the Bible said about creation and about history and about things like the nature of Jesus, they probably just accepted those things as being true. I think it's only in the last couple of generations that now there's the added layer of, well, there's a lot of generations being born that actually start from the standpoint that, no, that is not true. And so have completely separated the two. So I think for most of the last 2,000 years, at least Western history has been defined by the principles of the Bible. So yeah, I think you're definitely onto something there.
And I do think there's also an element of, to some degree, there's an inevitability that humans will act a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And so generally speaking, even if there is a moral imperative to treat your enemy well, most people don't treat their enemies well. Like like judge any civilization on how it treated its enemies, and you're going to be hard pressed to say this person, or especially you go back a century or more, that one nation is much more advanced than the other. was usually just the modus operandi that you try to kill everybody and you hate your enemies. And
Well, there's something that happens in war, especially when you remove the normal societal restraints that exist on people. Like in our society, we understand that you don't just go up and kill a guy because you're upset with him about something, but you remove those restraints and you make it to where killing is ingrained in you because that guy's trying to kill you and you've got to kill him before he kills you. And pretty soon you stop thinking about loving your enemy. And, because my enemy, I've been trained and conditioned to think is trying to kill me. So I don't have room to love him. I have to kill him before he kills me, and it's self-preservation. And you've removed a lot of those restraints. And that's why we so often see the worst in humanity come out in war. People who do things, who massacre children, who never before they were in the military would ever have thought about harming a child, now will indiscriminately kill children because their bloodlust is up and because those people killed your people. And it's fascinating how that all unfolds.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of like the ideal, and the sort of religion informs that, and I think sometimes that does it sometimes gets lost because not everybody adheres to it, and people are breaking their own rules. There's tons of hypocrites throughout history. But it is interesting, like the real scholarship on the Crusades. You see that the people engaged in that, it's sort of tempting for us to say, that was a religious, there was a religious component as the excuse for something that must have been more driven by, almost a Marxist view of materialism. There must be some economic or territorial expansion. Like, no, the people taking part in these things did believe this was a religious cause, and that sort of goes back to what we were talking at the beginning of the show. People have, it's sort of incumbent on us to try to put ourselves in the mindset of people who lived a long time ago and recognize they don't think like you, and they have different suppositions about the world and different biases and prejudices and hatreds, and the things that they hold dear are very different from you. And a lot of the Western world, including, lived in an honor culture for so long that we did a video on pistol dueling in England, and
affairs of honor.
1840s. It's like just the principle of, you have insulted me in public. Now I have it makes sense with our genteel laws that you might die for that.
Yeah, it's imagine putting people who get on Twitter and flame people in the 1840s in that culture, where some of the stuff that people say just in passing over and over and over and over again on social media could get them shot 200 years ago.
Yeah, and there's always I encounter it all the time. Just almost like a kind of a flippancy when it comes to history with some people. And this is how I can tell they don't really study history at all, because they'll say something along the lines of, people were so stupid back then, or like, how could you even think that? And it's like, dude, if you were born in that time, you would just be playing the same script. Like, I think it's silly when people say like, oh, they believe that they believed in geocentrism. That's so stupid. It's like, well, every scholar at the time believed in geocentrism and inherited it from the Ptolemaic model. So
150 years ago, we didn't know there were other galaxies. The Milky Way was it. There was nothing more than that. And the best scientists in the world thought that.
Yeah.
It doesn't make them stupid. It's just the information they had.
Yeah. And you think, sorry, I put his thing back on. But yeah, I mean, people are working with what they have, what they grew up in. And so the idea, it's like, if you lived in the time of the Salem witch trials, you would have thought that, that could be a witch. It's a valid question to ask. Is that a witch?
Yeah.
Might not be, but that was one of the things we did, sponsorship from MyHeritage.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things I found, I kind of didn't know anything about my maternal grandmother's line. I know that they had been in Maine for a while. And so we traced that back to part of her line was Scottish, and I have some Scottish on the other side, which I thought was completely Irish, but there's some Scottish in that side too. But the one of the lines goes back to Salem in 1635 is when these Puritans arrived. I didn't know I was related to any Puritans. And so it's a tiny amount, but this ancestor advocated on behalf of their neighbor, who was accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials, and it was a husband and wife, and his name was Benjamin Marshall. So he signed some letter saying that we've known these people to be good Christians; they don't practice witchcraft. Well, the husband was still executed. The wife wasn't executed only because she was pregnant. She gave birth to her kid while in prison. And then I think it had sort of blown over by the time she had the kid. But, you know, they're not, my ancestor is not saying that there are no witches, just that this person I don't think is a witch.
Right.
And to make that more concrete, and to stop me from feeling so good about my ancestors, his father was sued multiple times. So the one that came over in 1635 for accusing people's wives of being witches around Salem. So this was before the witch trials where they were executing people, and he probably had some spat with people around town and said your wife's a witch.
Yeah.
But he was sued and he had to pay a fine because the court looked into it and said, no, they're not a witch.
That's another thing that even looking back on the witch trials, it can be tempting for some people to say, a bunch of stupid people, you know, completely panicking and crazy, which, yeah, to some extent that's true. And, you know, it's just kangaroo courts and they were killing everyone. There was some process they would use to determine if you're a witch. And I remember I was listening to that historian Tom Holland. They interviewed someone who is a historian on the witch trials, and she was talking about how actually it was extremely consequential that they tried to come to a solid verdict on this, because if they condemn an innocent man or woman, that condemns their own soul to hell. So it's kind of like some revisionist takes on the witch trials.
It wasn't as lighthearted and just kind of, just whatever. We're just condemning everybody.
Yeah.
They did take it seriously. And that's, you know, when people ask me questions about what would you have done in X, Y, and Z situation, rather than saying, here's what I think they should have done, I say, well, here's what I would have done with the information that they had in the context they had. Like, I will never go back and say, I think Harry Truman should have done this or this when it comes to dropping the bombs on Japan. What I say is, if I were in Truman's situation and it was presented to me the way it was, this is the decision I would have made. You know, and that's a different way of looking at the history than just revisionist history. Oh, well, he messed up and look what everything that happened because of the choice he made, kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it is interesting too when you study Native American history a lot. There is what's considered to be sort of a progressive liberal faction that's arguing on behalf of the Native Americans. They need to be treated with dignity.
Yeah.
But that faction today would be considered possibly genocidal, because the way that they were saying that we saved the Native American is that we send them to residential schools and we Christianize
make them Christian.
them.
Yeah.
And change their way of life so that they're agricultural. And it's like, so if you existed at that time, you consider yourself a compassionate person, you're probably in that camp, which today people would say, wow, what a terrible person.
Same thing with folks like Abraham Lincoln and many others wanted to free the slaves, but then wanted to send them to Central America or to Africa, because he said, you know what, they're never going to be equality between blacks and whites in America, so we need to get them out of here and send them back to Africa. That would be horrifying to people today, but that was his idea of doing what he thought was best for them at the time. Right.
Okay, so we got a question. If we three do a collaboration, what will we do? Well, we have very different content styles, but I feel like a meetup could be in the cards at some point.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you're talking about like, for example, doing on-site stuff, if you ever do something like that where you're showing something, there's an opportunity there. And, you know, come to Ohio, we could go to the Serpent Mound. You can talk about the history of those Native Americans.
Yeah.
There you go. That's the kind of thing. There's always opportunities for that. I'm going to England in a few weeks and going to be connecting with the guys from the channel
right, I saw that.
Decades. And I have no idea what they've got planned for me, but they've got something in store. So,
And this sort of counts as a collaboration.
yeah, for sure.
We have family in Ohio too, so we do make
nice.
trips out there. So maybe
What
one
part of
day we
Ohio?
can meet up.
Orville.
Yep.
Oh, that's not far from me at all.
Oh,
Oh, really?
all right.
No.
Yeah.
All right. So something's in the
We'll set a
cards.
date in the future.
Blogging through history, is there a battlefield you would have liked to see that doesn't exist anymore?
Doesn't
For
exist
example,
anymore.
land was destroyed via nature or built on, etc.
Fort Wagner. I was just in Charleston, South Carolina a few weeks ago. And most of where the 54th Massachusetts in the movie Glory, where they fought, most of that's gone now. And the grave site's gone. It's been washed out to sea. That was one I really wish I could have gone to when I was in Charleston. I think that's probably the one.
Another one for you, blogging through history. What area of history that you are not familiar with would you like to learn more about the most?
I mentioned this the other day. East Asian history, China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia. I know very, very little, and it's such an important part of history. And there was so much going on there that even impacts our world today that I just don't know enough about. Definitely East Asian history.
That's
And
a
I
lot
know
of
you guys cover some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of the compass of this channel is just all over the place. It's partly because I have historical FOMO. I'm just constantly worried that, well, actually, I don't know anything about these people over here. I don't know anything about this country. How do I know nothing about this dynasty in China? I got to go read about that. So, it'll stay very varied because, we have an eye toward what the audience wants and sort of appeasing that, but also so much of it's based on our own curiosity and just be able to say, all right, this is a whole new domain we're going to step into, our ancient India one. I don't know anything about this. I'm going to go read a bunch and talk to people about this and immerse myself on that. So
how long have you guys been doing this now?
We started in 2018. When I was still deciding, I was like, maybe I'll go back for grad school, get a PhD in history. But if not, let me get a real job. And it took me a while to get a real job. But then we'll, start putting out these tiny videos here and there. And the first video in one day had 800 views, which was
nice.
Huge.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't know how people are finding us, but yeah. So
do you go back and watch videos from then and cringe and think, oh, I wouldn't have done that way?
Yep, I do that all the time, especially with the editing. I'm like, why did I choose that? What type of painting was that? Happens.
And there's such a change in tone too. If you go back, then it's really video essay, quick little fun history facts, and then more and more it became like, all right, Joe, maybe you could make a painting for this, or maybe we could tell a story about this, and then more and more it just became like something completely different.
Well, we evolve, right? You the more you do something, the more you learn how you want to do it, the more you learn what works, what doesn't, the more you get comfortable with a style and you try different things. And most people I talk to who do YouTube say they go back a year or two on their old videos and they're like, that's how quickly we're constantly growing and evolving with this.
Yeah, I actually went to school for English and philosophy, but I had always, since a little kid, loved art, loved drawing stuff, and then I think towards the end of college I started to learn about digital art and digital painting, and then in my own head it was like, okay, let's work with this. Maybe I can become a freelance artist eventually. And then Chris came to me with the idea of the YouTube channel, which I shot him down and said it was a really bad idea. It will never amount to anything.
I did think the name sounded good, so I was like, I'm surprised nobody's taken it.
And then oddly enough, I always thought okay, this YouTube thing, maybe it's a little side money down the line. And I thought, but my real dream is to become an artist, a concept artist. So I kept on working at that, but then the channel blew up, and then Joe Rogan shouted it out. So
Oh wow,
bigger and
nice.
bigger. And then our style started to shift more into actually utilizing my artwork. So
Mhm.
it's funny how that worked out. I became a kind of a concept artist, but for the YouTube channel. So
So
yeah.
here's a question for you. From the first concept of a topic for a video to when that video is released, what's the timeline like for you for that?
Um,
Um, Chris will come up with an idea, and it's usually like a man, I want to learn more about this type of thing, and then he'll talk to me about it, and then I think from there we just spitball a lot, and then after the idea really originates, would you say probably about a month or so, and then the episode's out?
yeah,
Oh
it's
wow.
like it's probably 2.5 weeks of research, and
And
that's
then
just
2
like
weeks
full
of
time
editing and stuff.
reading tons of notes. That has taken longer. There was probably a point in time where I could have done it in like week and a half or something. I'm just been so obsessive about like footnotes and stuff now, but also the art takes so much time to research.
Mm,
Um,
Yeah.
Learning that the Confederates didn't have 3 legs; they had 2 legs. Uh, but also, it's just like it sometimes depends on the topic. But what I'll do as I'm researching and writing it, I'll get different ideas for the different paintings I want, and I'll pass that on to Joe. But at the same time, I need to give Joe all the information he
mm,
needs to paint those things. So it's like,
To
all
be
right, well,
historically
this
accurate. Yeah.
this is what we think this Mongol castle looked like. I know I need this siege painting, and then I'll make an entire guide. This is what the Mongol armor was like at this time. But between these wars, it might have been different. This is what their siege engines look
mm,
like. This is our best idea of what the walls look like based on ruins found here, here, and here. So that takes extra time. But that's where it sort of overlaps. It's like as I'm doing the research and writing, Joe can be doing the art, and then more and more he's been composing a lot of the music as well.
mm.
Um, yeah, it takes about a month to get something out, sometimes longer, but yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. It's very I think for both of us, Chris from a more historical research standpoint, but me from a artistic standpoint, it's very transportive for us. So it's really strange because we'll be working on one video that's set in the 1800s, and now the next video maybe it's the medieval era, and you just kind of have to snap your mind into another mode of thinking, and now you're immersing yourself. You're listening to soundtracks from medieval movies, or you're watching movies like for Trafalgar we watched Master and Commander again because we really want to get inspiration, but also the sounds in that movie too, like the
Yeah.
whizzing of the cannonballs and stuff, like it's just perfect. So there was a lot of inspiration taken from that movie as well. So it's fun. It's like we have a time machine, and then every time we
Mm.
switch topics, we just turn the dial in another
So
direction.
I'm going to be interested for you guys after. Are you both going to Mongolia?
Yep.
Yep.
So
In
after you
August.
guys go there and you actually see those places, it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts the content that you make after that.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
no, we'll definitely get reference photos and stuff for the paintings as well. But yeah, it's just going to be, so much of it's like an artistic endeavor for us. But I think um, more and more, it's really trying to get across how did something look, how was it like to experience that thing. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, we have to do more American history as well. I want to do Civil War, and World War One is
Mm.
pretty high up there for me because
Well, I can tell you this might be a good time to be thinking about World War One because, and I've mentioned this on my channel, and I think I've made it public now. So it used to be called Project X on the channel, but in February, they've already put the trailer out. History Channel has for their docudrama that's coming out about the Harlem Hellfighters, which was a black unit, 369th
Yeah.
Infantry,
right.
World War One. But there's also a 4-hour series coming out on American involvement in World War One at the end of May.
Wow.
on the
Oh,
History
okay.
Channel. And the only reason I know is because I'm one of their on-screen experts for that series.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
filmed it
Okay,
back
thanks
in
for the heads
August.
up.
So I'm excited for that, and I know some of the topics they're covering. So I'm hoping, and that's why I just launched this week my new channel, Stories of the Great War, which is going to be focused. It's completely original content, all focused on World War One, because I'm hoping that that'll maybe kickstart interest in the United States for World War One. Because honestly, we don't think much about World War One because we weren't as involved as we were in World War Two. And
Yeah.
I think there's still some incredible stories there to be told. So
I think we're getting more and more. I don't know. The popular sphere is getting more and more of a resurgence and interest in World War One. There was what was it? They Shall Not Grow Old.
Yeah, Peter Jackson.
1917. I haven't seen it yet, but All Quiet on the Western Front was World War One as well,
yes,
right?
yep.
You know,
And it just, even in understanding history, I mean, everybody's, when it comes to history in America, is obsessed with World War II. But understanding World War II means understanding World War One. Why was George Patton in the position he was in World War II? Well, he was America's first tank brigade commander in World War One. He was one of the only guys in America, in the U.S. Army, that knew anything about tanks. The guy who was the staff officer who planned all of the American movements and attacks in World War One was Major George C. Marshall, who ends up the chief of staff running the entire show for the U.S. in World War II. Well, he got to start doing that in World War One. So those little stories are really fascinating.
All right. Well, thanks for the tip. We got to do some World War One content. I feel like that might be a bit like Trafalgar, where it's like there's a soundscape to that as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sure.
That's a great example of that is the idea of what's called drum fire artillery. People think of artillery as boom, 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 boom. In World War One, it was boom, 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 boom. That's how it was going. Like it was incessant. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of shells in one sector in one day. It's absurd the amount of artillery that happened.
And I feel like it reaches a point that we're trying to get across, which is like, well, what did something feel like? But especially those moments that are just, there's a tone you can nail there.
Yeah.
And it should be sort of very devastating and bleak. And in a way, there's kind of like there's a beautiful art that comes out of it.
Yeah.
That is horrific in nature. It's like gray and overcast and ashen and
trees. Like if you look at pictures from World War One battlefields, it's just barren moonscapes with a few stumps of trees sticking up because of all the artillery that has just destroyed everything. And that's what those guys were living in.
Do you think, I could be misremembering this, but I thought I heard somewhere that a lot of the ethical considerations that came out in World War II were the result of kind of mistakes made in World War One with regards to the introduction of heavy artillery, chemical warfare and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think there's some credibility to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the people who were the leaders in World War II had been lieutenants and captains in World War One and had lived on the ground through that stuff. So it absolutely had an impact on them. Yeah, he's right. World War One stories are nightmare fuel, 100%. I tell people all the time. I mean, there have been some horrible wars in human history. World War One's the one I'd least want to be a part of.
And when we're talking about what is the bleakest point in history, so I asked it about the U.S., but I would guess a lot of time. I don't know. I guess if you had asked that question for Europe, I think a lot of it would look like 1917. What does the world look like?
The difference to me between World War One and World War II, in World War II, it's easy to see what the Allies are fighting for. If you're an American, a Brit, Russian, you understand exactly what it is you're doing and why it matters. In World War One, there's not only the devastation and the deaths of millions, there's a hopelessness and a senselessness to it all that doesn't exist, at least for me, in World War II, that makes it even worse, I think.
Yeah, I remember reading, I forget what it was. It might have been like a Kipling poem that was...
Who lost a son in World War One.
Yeah.
Kipling did.
It was like a Christopher Hitchens, like Vanity Fair article or something, just sort of it really had nothing to do with politics or anything. It was just sort of, he was a great writer and he's covering Kipling and World War One in general. and he went to some battlefield, and they're trying to identify who died here and stuff. And he just had some ominous description of sort of like the soil is fertilized with all these bones of the people that went unidentified. Yep. And it's like, I think if you ask that question, what is the bleakest point, or where does it look the bleakest for Europe? It might be World War I, even over World War II, just because it was so unprecedented that you go, you know, it might be 1915 where you're going, Jesus, like what, this has got to be the end. And that's, I mean, the literature that came out after that is so pessimistic and sort of, cynical because of what happened there. But yeah, we'll definitely cover some of that. I mean, those are places to visit as well. If we're thinking about historical sites, but.
Oh, it's incredible. This is why I do the vlogs from historical sites, because to me, you can't fully understand a battle, for example, until you go to the battlefield and you see what they saw, because then things start to make sense that didn't make sense before. You know, I go to Antietam, and I can read in a book that a couple of hundred Georgians held off an entire corps of Union soldiers at this little bridge, Burnside Bridge, on the southern end of the battlefield. And I can think, well, how could that possibly happen? And then you go there and you're immediately like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I understand why this is possible, because you see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You hear people talk about Gettysburg, a certain energy there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think that's the importance of movies or arts or, sort of what we try to do. And then you going to those sites as well. When I think about why I like history, there's always sort of like post hoc reason that people come up with so that we don't repeat it. It's a good thing to do. For me, it's okay, fine. I can come up with some sort of like ethical like reason that makes me feel good, but it's just so interesting to me that I don't need anything about like I should read this so that, you know, this country doesn't do this next. For me, it's just what did people go through, and I think it's so easy for us to relegate those stories of the past to almost just the storybook in our head. It is weird to think that there was a time where the armies in the world were just in armor in phalanx formation, and that was just how you lived your life. And it seems fake. And you could go to a museum, you could see a helmet, you can see a shield, and it's like, this actually happened. You can go to those battlefields where it seems fake to say that 300,000 people died here, but it's right there.
But also history is, I think our channel shows it pretty well too. It's deeply humanizing.
Yeah.
Because it dissolves, you can go far back enough, in any culture, any family, and you'll find, like Chris likes to say, you'll find a lot of really bad people, you'll find saints and sinners, and I think that's something that at least ethical consideration from my standpoint is, it's allowed me to be, you know, I want to say tolerant, but I don't know if that's the right word, but it's allowed me to like not segment up people by, you know, culture or anything, that we all fall prey to the same, you know, inadequacies, but also we all can be incredibly moral as well. So.
Good comment here from Q Dell. I think that's sort of what you're getting at, is that it's just
human condition.
Yeah, it's not necessarily any justification for things that happened back then, but just being able to see yourself in the past and be able to say, you know, almost like what we were talking about before, like imposing your own values on figures in the past and imagining they have the same beliefs as you, or that you would have been better in that case, is a way that you're kind of disconnected from it. And so to be able to just engage with it and see, you know, humans in all of these situations is is the
That's
best
why
way.
I love the stories of the individuals, you know, and that's so much of this new World War I channel I started, Stories of the Great Wars. Anybody, we can talk about armies and divisions attacking here and here, but I love learning about, like I posted a video today of this lieutenant. His name was William Hodgson. He was in the 9th Devonshires, and they were in this one part of the line that overlooked this place called Mametz Wood at the Somme, and there were all these machine guns, and they knew for weeks that they were attacking this machine gun position. And he was an Oxford graduate, and he this incredible level of education. He was a writer, and he sat down and he wrote this poem called Before Action, which is basically him laying out his thoughts before this attack they knew was coming. And it was published 2 days before he was killed. And the last line of it is, "Help me to die, O Lord." And the whole thing was about him coming to terms with, okay, God, I know what we have to do, and I know I'm probably going to die doing it. So just him preparing his own heart and his own mind for what he needed to do. And it just helped me to connect on a level I wouldn't otherwise if I was looking at a map and seeing this division attacked here. It just completely different way of looking at the same story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an interesting way and a boring way to tell every story. And I can make a video on Trafalgar that's very uninteresting. You know, you could do that, and you could have Horatio Nelson seem very uninteresting. But you know, once you get far enough into a history that you can connect with characters, it's any story. I mean, that's any DreamWorks or Pixar. It's a koala talking, but it's actually a person. It's actually supposed to be you or something. So yeah, I mean, this has been a great conversation, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thank you for coming on. If you are a History Dose viewer and this is your first time encountering Vlogging Through History, right at the top of the description, you can click that, go subscribe to his channel, check out his stuff. He reacted to our content and he said nice things, which is why we like him.
It was fantastic. And I one of the cool things, now granted, your channel is bigger than mine. I've got just over 400,000 subscribers, but one of the cool things now about where my channel is and the fact that I do look at other channels is I have the opportunity now to shine spotlights on channels that maybe have 10 or 20,000 subscribers that are making fantastic content, but for whatever reason, the algorithm hasn't picked them up yet. And if I can shine my 400,000 subscriber light on that channel and maybe get them some press, so to speak, then I'll feel good about what I do at the end of the day and doing reactions. So, you know, that's kind of where I'm at with my channel now, is I'm hopefully able to do that and help a lot of other people along the way. You guys don't need my help, but it's still great to introduce new people to the channel. So,
so Pancake Mix is right at the top of the description. It'll be linked at Vlogging Through History. All right. Thank you so much. Hope to do this again sometime.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. This is awesome. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris.